Hello, participants of the Lead Your Team to Greatness Masterclass. We are on day 3, and today we're going to talk about decisions. How can we make good decisions with our teams? The more senior we get, the more our job boils down to decisions. But what most of us think, according to research, is that organizations do not make so many good decisions. Something in the decision-making process is not working for many businesses. Most of the mergers and acquisitions that don't pay off. Most of the market entries do not pay off. There's something there, a combination of not the right decision with not the right execution, that a lot of businesses make bets, make moves that do not pay off. So, why is this a step in this masterclass? Why don't we need to decide on our own? Again, research from Cloverpop said that an inclusive and diverse team will make better decisions than an individual 82% of the time. The team needs to be diverse and inclusive. So it doesn't mean that we need to make team decisions for every decision. That'll be a nightmare. But for important decisions, involving our team will help us ensure better quality of the final outcome. What I'm going to cover today is what are the different types of decision-making process. By the way, decision-making process and the quality of the decision-making process has been found to be more important than the analysis for the decision, and that was research done by McKinsey. I'm going to talk a little bit about biases. I love unearthing errors in our thinking. I think it's very important to be aware of those things. And we're going to talk a little bit about productive conflict in the end. So this is the third step of my 4D framework. Day 1, we covered define the problem. Day 2, develop ideas. Day 3, it's all about decisions. There are 3 decision-making processes. One is consensus. That means everyone needs to agree before we proceed. There is majority rule. In this type of decision-making process, there is some type of voting. And the majority, whatever the majority wants, that's what we do. And there is the consultative decision-making process, which is we consult the team airs their opinions, and then there is one decision maker. It could be the leader, it could be the expert, it could be the owner of the project. It doesn't have to be the leader, but there is a decision owner. Okay? I would love to hear from you. Which one do you use with your teams most often? Let me know in the comments. Is it consensus, majority rule, or consultative decision-making process? Or you have a clear decision maker? Which one? Which one is your favorite? Which one do you prefer? Which one does your business or your organization use more often? And it's interesting to notice as I'm waiting for your comments, there is a cultural element to this. Cultures like the American culture, they have a more top-down decision-making. While Japanese or German culture, they have a more consensus-based decision-making. I have my first answers. Consultative, consensus and consultative, depending on the scenario. Consultative. All right. Okay. So it's worth mentioning there is not right and wrong answer here. You will need to decide depending on the decision, on the culture of your team, on the need for speed you have, on the need for buy-in that you have. You may need to flex this decision-making processes, consensus. So I will give you some information, some techniques, some advice for all 3 of them. We have some more consensus from Ma, consultative, Harold, consultative, Gabriela. Yes. So let me start. I work in consultation. However, the culture is of top-down decision making. Yes. A lot of American companies are. As I said, it is a culture plays a role here. I'm currently working with a team in Sweden. Sweden, in the consensus, they're very consensus-driven culture. So they need everybody to agree before they make a decision. So it's fascinating working with different markets. Consensus is great. Juries have consensus, for example, when there is a huge risk of getting it wrong, like putting someone in jail. Consensus makes sense, right? Let me start giving you some best practice, when to use it. Let's dive into each one of those, right? Consensus. As I said, it's a useful, the benefits of consensus decision making is you, by default, you try to understand all perspectives. In order to find a solution that is acceptable to everyone, there is a lot of discussion and understanding, and that's the major benefit. For consensus to work, you need to have an informed team. They need to know in order for you to want consensus. The cost of the consensus, as we know, it is expensive and it is time consuming. And that's why my advice would be, if you're using consensus, you need to use it sparingly and for very important decisions. For example, some funds, they need consensus of their partners, whether they're going to acquire or invest in an investment. If it's a huge risk of getting it wrong, that may you want to consider consensus. Other than that, Mattel, for example, a company that creates toys, they had such a consensus culture in the 90s when their stock really went down. Then they would have meetings upon meetings to make simple decisions, a logo change or a new website change. It will take them a year to change the website because they were trying to get this consensus. So we need to be very aware that consensus is costly and time consuming. The benefit is the solution might be a solution that everyone buys into. You have a better commitment and a better execution. So how can you do consensus? A good tip actually is you may give it a timeline. You say, if we don't reach consensus by 5 o'clock, I will ask Sarah to make a decision. So if this is a combination of consensus plus consultative. I heard here consultative input with final sign-off lying with the lead person for the process. Yeah, that's a combination. That said, even more important than which one of the three processes you will use, even more important is that you're very clear what the process is and you're clear in advance. Because what happens, what creates frustration in many teams, is that the team members think they have a vote when in reality they don't. So if you are using consultative, make it clear. I will listen to everyone and then I will make the decision. People are adults, they can live with that. What they cannot live is a lot of leaders try to pretend that this is a consensus process or even a majority rule process when it's not. When a lot of times they might have made already the decision, or they know that they are the decision maker. In this case, make it explicit. People can live with that as long as their ideas are heard, as long as you listen to them, and as long as you explain how you came to that decision. And that's actually probably the biggest tip I have for today. People will commit to your decision even if they disagree, if they perceive the decision-making process as fair. And the two things that make it fair is A, they feel listened to, and B, they understand. It's not a black box. They understand how you reach the decision. Feel free to give comments, ask questions. I really want to have a discussion and interact. This is a fascinating topic. How do we make decisions in business? It's one of the biggest skills for our success. How can you leverage the collective brain power of our team to make better decisions? 2 tips, again, for consensus would be, not tips, scripts. If everyone has agreed and you have one person that doesn't agree, maybe you can say, what would it take to get you on board? Or if you have a proposal that somehow you're almost there, something else you can say is there anyone who cannot live with this proposal? Because consensus doesn't mean that everyone needs to be enthusiastically supporting this. This might be too optimistic, but it should be that there's not a veto. There's not someone who will sabotage it, or there's not veto votes. So a question, is there anyone who cannot leave with this proposal, can help you reach the consensus a little bit quicker? And then if there's someone who cannot live with this proposal, give them the responsibility. What do they want to change on this proposal? What would it get to get you on board without making the proposal worse for everybody else? Give them the responsibility, the person that doesn't agree, to do the work to make it an acceptable to all proposal if consensus is what you're going for. Any questions for consensus? I will move on to talk a little bit about majority rule. Majority rule is you do a vote and you go with what the majority wants. And I've seen a lot of companies, a lot of teams doing that. The benefit of this is that it's perceived as democratic. Somehow, because we live in democracies, the vote is the vote. People tend to think it's a fair decision. The majority wanted this proposal. You might, though, the counter argument for this is you might create an unhappy minority. And we've seen this in sometimes even in politics. People that haven't voted for this proposal, they can become an unhappy minority. And if you don't manage this correctly, they can sabotage the execution. The other disadvantage of the majority rule is it will create politics in the organization. Like if you know you're going into a meeting and there will be a voting, people will start doing political alliances before the meeting, trying to swing the vote in the favor of the proposal they want. The majority rule is like that. The benefits is it's perceived as democratic and fair, and it's quick. Sometimes we might jump to a vote, and this I've seen leaders who are not comfortable with conflict. When there is two decisions on the table, they say, let's jump to a vote rather than let discussion, let some productive debate happen. Maybe we've come up with a third solution. When there's a little bit of tension, they put to a vote, and that maybe it's not the right solution. Maybe they should have waited for this productive debate to happen. So be careful when you're jumping to a vote a little bit too early in the process. If you have an important decision to make, of course, like if the decision is not important, you need to move fast. These are the tips. Some other tips for majority rule: have people write it down rather than raising hands, because there is, as we know, there's so much peer pressure. Have people write down their vote. Have them make the vote anonymous. If there's a lot of politics in the voting, you might want to make it anonymous. Now with virtual meetings, there's so much software. You may not want people to do a simple vote. Do we vote for proposal A, B, or C? You might want to give them some dots and have dotmocracy. I give 3 dots to the first decision proposal and 2 dots to the other one. That might give you more information about what they think. And you might want to have criteria. If you have, let's say, 3 candidates to hire and you're in a hiring committee, you may have the criteria and vote each candidate for each one of the criteria. We had that when I worked at Google, and it was very helpful because I thought that a candidate was amazing, but the system made me actually to vote on every one of the criteria. And then when I went in every one of the criteria, I realized, maybe this candidate is not so good at this criteria. So you can have a more nuanced majority rule voting. So this was around majority rule. None of the comments said, most of you said either consultative or consensus. So I'm fascinated by this. You don't use voting in your business. Let's talk now about consultative. Consultative, again, a lot of American companies love this. The good thing is you have a clear decision maker. You're more likely to have a decision made. You're less likely to have meetings upon meetings to get agreement. You can move faster. If you're in a very innovative organization, having a clear decision maker can help you move faster. what you want to be careful if the decision maker is the leader is to avoid the sunflower effect. What's the sunflower effect? That people will not voice their opinion. They will try to agree with the leader. If you are doing consultative, you still need to make sure you hear all the opinions. You still need to encourage this productive debate or productive conflict so you can actually make a good decision. Otherwise, why did you have the meeting? Why did you involve your team in the first place? So try to avoid the sunflower effect, that people say what you want to hear because they know you're making a decision, and try to avoid the misunderstanding that when you're consulting people, they think they have a vote when they really are just consultants. These are the 3 ways we can make decisions. I will move on now to what are the biases. Let me know if you have any questions on those. I will move on what are the biases when we make team decisions. And one of the biggest biases I touched on day number 1, which is the hidden profiles bias. That's that people, when we are in the decision-making meeting, they will not share unique to them information. And if you read into the hidden profile bias is fascinating. They've done experiments again and again on hiring committees that almost always they will hire the wrong person if actually the right person has skills that are not known to all. Let's say the interviewer A knows one skill of the right person, the interviewer B knows the other skill. If there is unique information, the team will not manage to pull all the information and make the right decision. They will hire the wrong candidate because they will not share all the information with each other. So that's something you need to be aware when you're making decision, get all the information out. A second bias that happens in group and team decisions is polarization. What I found fascinating is that teams tend to pay for an acquisition more than what individuals said they were willing to pay. Why does this happen? Because of the phenomenon of polarization. If everyone agrees towards a proposal, a solution, the group moves towards a more extreme position. If I was around 70% sure, for example, to do an acquisition, and then I talk with my teammates and everybody's pro the acquisition and share all their arguments, from 70% I became 95% and I'm willing to pay more for this acquisition. And this is a phenomenon of polarization. So we need to bear in mind, if the group is leaning towards this direction, the group will tend to move a lot on the extreme because they will support each other towards that direction. So they will move and they will be polarized. I have a comment. I agree. Avoid the hippo effect, the highest paid person in the room. Yes, that's a great comment. The third bias we need to be aware is the sunk cost fallacy. Sunk cost means that we decide about the future depending on whether we have invested in the past towards one course of action. And I'm bringing it here. We know about sunk cost on individual decision making because it has been found that sunk cost fallacy is worse in groups. I have a question. How do you manage polarization effect to consensus decision making method with productive conflict before you reach the consensus? You try to unearth, and I'll give you one more technique. When I talk I'll talk about it now, actually, the pre-mortem technique. Pre-mortem is, you can simply ask the question, you're almost there. You haven't committed to the decision. You're almost there in the consensus. And you say, we're a year from now, and our course of action has been a disaster. Write down what has happened. And you have everyone imagine they're a year from now. This decision was a freaking disaster. Let's write down what happened. And there's a brilliance doing the pre-mortem rather than the pro-mortem. Instead of saying what could go wrong, by actually thinking backwards, it's been proven it's a lot more insightful. So I think that's what I would do to avoid polarization. Before you commit, do a pre-mortem and then commit. Let me go back to the sunk cost. I love the questions, keep them coming. The reason I'm talking about sunk cost fallacy here is because it's worse in groups. And if you see the biggest failures in business, they were driven from sunk cost fallacy. You would see that Kodak kept investing on film, even though the world has moved on, because they have invested in the past, they kept investing. HMV, they kept opening stores, even though people were buying DVDs online. Nokia kept advertising and producing their software for phones, even though people have moved on to Apple and Android. Most of the business failures we see are because of sunk cost fallacy. We escalate a commitment because we have invested in the past towards this course of action. The group will tend to escalate the commitment. So be aware when you're deciding in your business, when you're deciding of your team, is there sunk cost fallacy here? And I even saw it. I went on Sunday to Winter Wonderland in London. It's like a park. And we had pre-bought some tickets to do some ice slides. And we were there, and it was a huge queue because of the coronavirus. They ask you to pre-buy and pre-book the rides. And there was a huge queue. And we're half an hour waiting in the queue as a family to do this ride. And I'm realizing, oh my goodness, this is a sunk cost fallacy definition. Because we had already paid for the ride, we had waited for half an hour, and there was probably one more hour of wait. And I asked the question, would we be doing this? Would we be waiting for 90 minutes to do the ice slide if we hadn't bought it? And if the question is, I wouldn't do that, I wouldn't waste 90 minutes waiting in a queue with my family, then we were trapped by the sunk cost fallacy. The only reason we were there, it was because we had paid. But what paid, it paid. It's sunk cost. It doesn't matter. So I actually left the queue with my daughter. We said, it's sunk cost fallacy. We're going to leave the queue. And my son and husband stayed because for them, it wasn't sunk cost fallacy. They really wanted to wait and do the ride. So I hope with this example, I explain how sunk cost works even when the team is our family. And one more bias for you is the groupthink. And we all heard about groupthink. What is groupthink? Groupthink is similar to the polarization, but what's different is that the group starts thinking with one mind, but also the group starts thinking they're invincible. That's what groupthink is. Pearl Harbor, the disaster in America, is attributed to a groupthink error because the people in Pearl Harbor, they were warned because there were Japanese messages intercepted that said the Japanese were planning to attack Pearl Harbor. They ignored those messages because of groupthink. They thought, that doesn't make sense. Who'd attack us? A sense of invincibility. The same with Swiss Bank. I think there was a bankruptcy. And again, they had so much money and they started to think they're invincible. And that's when groupthink happens. When we start, there's no different opinions. We all think with one mind and we think we are invincible. And a lot of failures in business happen from groupthink. So these are the 4 biases I want you to be aware that happen when we are making a decision with a group. Sunk cost fallacy, that's escalating commitment towards something we've invested in the past. Polarization, moving to a more extreme position when we're discussing with the group. Groupthink, thinking with one mind, not dissenting views, not allowing any dissenting views, and a feeling of invincibility. And hidden profile bias, not sharing unique information. How can we make good decisions with all those biases coming in? And the number one tool is productive conflict. And this is something we don't get right. Most of the teams that come to me for team coaching, either they have toxic conflict, which is not productive, and it's when you attack personally one another, or most of them, like I don't see many toxic conflict teams. Although there's toxicity, and we can talk about this, and I can talk to you about how you identify toxic behaviors in the team, there's mostly conflict avoidance, which means not the best decisions are being made. People talk in corridors or in personal chats, and they don't talk in the meeting. They don't feel safe to bring dissenting views, and therefore our decisions, therefore, is more likely to be polarized, groupthink. All of those biases happen when we don't encourage productive conflict in our teams. So, if you were, let me hear from you. How is conflict in your team? Is it productive? You have productive conflict? Is there more, you would like to have more conflict? There's a little bit of conflict avoidance, or there's too much conflict. You will actually want to tone it down and have it more productive. Let me know. I'm really curious to see how is conflict in your team. And then I'm going to give you a couple of strategies on what you can do if you're on the other side of the productive conflict, of either you have too much and it can turn a little bit nasty and personal and toxic. What do you do in that case? Or if you have too little conflict, people are avoiding, they're not sharing what they think, their minds. Okay, let me know. I'll be waiting for your comments. So, which strategies do I want to share? That I have really went deep into the productive conflict, both for my team coaching work and for my book, Hold Successful Meetings. Let me share a strategy that you can do when you have a group that avoids conflict. And that's the blind balance sheet. So what is a blind balance sheet? Instead of telling people to share where they stand, do they prefer option A or option B? You ask them to write the pros and cons for every option. And you write the pros and cons for every option from everyone without people sharing what's their vote, how they stand on that decision. So what happens is, let's go. Option A, what are the pros? Everybody shares the pros. The pros, not the pros. What are the cons? Everybody shares the cons. So you don't have people vote until the end. What this does, a blind balance sheet, is people feel free to share everything and to share dissenting views and to share what works and what doesn't, to share all their thoughts really, without risking being perceived as a devil's advocate. By the way, devil's advocate is a great technique to have productive conflict. You just you encourage the people that do it. You become a devil's advocate. You may say, let me become a devil's advocate here for a moment and bring a dissenting view. And how you deal with the devil's advocates in your team is important, because if you crush them down, then other people will not share any dissenting views. And that's when you will have conflict avoidance in your team. Right. So what do you do? That's one of the techniques to do to encourage productive conflict. The pre-mortem we covered is another one. Having agreement on the criteria is another one. What do you do when the team has a little bit too much of a conflict? And things to do here, having more than two alternatives will help. That's why we spent time yesterday in how you generate a lot of ideas, because if you only have two solutions, it becomes a little bit polarized and there's a winner and a loser. Having more alternatives will help with toxic conflict. Having more data will help with toxic conflict. And what also will help is, if you have toxicity, actually, I will share with you an exercise I do with my teams to really educate them about what the toxic behavior looks like and create some awareness in the group about what toxic behavior is like. I have some comments. Let me read that. During conflict, we tend to discuss the reasons of the disagreement and discuss the solution for it for a consensus agreement. However, sometimes we do fall into method of the most senior decision maker to make the final call if we can't agree, using a risk-based discussion. Mary, I think that's great. I think that's combining the both of two worlds. What I would do is make it explicit in the beginning. We will try to reach a consensus. If we don't reach a consensus, the leader will make a decision. I think that's a perfectly valid way to do it, as long as it's clear, and because you want to avoid disappointment. For some people, they're like, oh, I thought we were going for consensus here. What's going on? If you make it explicit at the beginning, we'll try to reach a consensus. If there's no consensus, I will make the decision. That's fine. Okay. Toxic behaviors. There are 4 toxic behaviors, and these have actually been identified in couples. And then we've seen that they're the same toxic behaviors that work in teams. So by learning how to deal with the toxic behaviors, you'll be better leader and better with your life partner. So this is a win-win. What are the toxic behaviors? And whenever I share this with a team, they are fascinated, because some toxic behaviors you don't understand, you don't realize they are toxic. One, which most of us would agree, is blame. This is not productive criticism. This is like blaming someone. Yeah, that's not very productive. The second toxic behavior is sarcasm, being sarcastic. Humor and laughing are great, but we know what's the difference when there's humor or teasing, and we know when there's sarcasm, which is more trying to make someone feeling less inferior. The third toxic behavior, which is the one I've seen most often in teams, is defensiveness. And we know how that feels, like people being defensive, really close-minded, not accepting, trying to defend whenever there's a different view or even a different idea. And a lot of times I work with leaders who have imposter syndrome, and they become very defensive when even someone else has a good idea, because immediately they get triggered of, oh, I should have come up with this idea, and they're in red alert, and they might come across as defensive. And the fourth toxic behavior is stonewalling, which is cutting communication, really, not responding emails, maybe not showing up in meetings, stonewalling, or showing up in meetings but not talking. So an exercise I do with the teams I coach, and you may want to try this with your team. I write this is an in-person exercise, but I've done it virtually too. I'll tell you how I do it in person. I write the 4 toxic behaviors in 4 pieces of paper. I put them in the room, and I ask the team to walk around, feel the toxic behaviors: sarcasm, blame, stonewalling, defensiveness, and stand where they think is the toxic behavior that is more present in the team. So they vote with their feet. They stand closer to the paper. So it's very quickly realize what's the toxic behavior that is most present in that team. And by the way, all of the teams have toxic behaviors. It doesn't mean like this is something normal. We just identified that. It doesn't mean it's a horrible team to work on. We all display toxic behavior from time to time. And that's the second question I ask. I ask you personally, when you're having a bad day, what's the toxic behavior you might display? And then they move around and they can choose their behavior. It might be blame, it might be defensiveness. And then we sit down and we discuss what can we do, the antidotes of these toxic behaviors. How can we be less defensive and really accept that everything is true, has a 2% truth, for example, in it? How instead of blaming, we can be more curious. We can discuss after we have created awareness, then people are a lot more aware whether they're going to blame or defensiveness. All right. So to summarize today's session, there are 3 ways of decision-making: consensus, majority rule, consultative, and you can do a mix and match. There's not specific better or worse decision-making process. What matters is you choose one and you do it well, and you are clear which one it is with your people. We talked about the 4 decision-making biases: sunk cost, hidden profile bias, polarization, and groupthink. And we talked about the best tool you can have in order to avoid those biases, which is productive conflict. Tomorrow, I'm going to the fourth and final piece, which is the do. We did define the problem, develop ideas, decide, and do. How do you inspire your team for action? How do you plan for action? This is tomorrow. And let me know if you have any questions, comments. I love the discussion today. If you feel complete, I'll see you tomorrow. I will move on to talk a little bit about 3 new programs I want to share with you from the leader path if you want to work with us more closely. So the first program I wanted to share with you is the Leader Mind. This is a mastermind. It is only for 6 leaders only. We meet once a month between 90 minutes 90 minutes. Everyone brings a challenge. We coach each other on the challenge, and there's a chat group during the month. So this is the Leader Mind. And it's launching in the new year because there was demand to having a small mastermind group coaching. And who is this for? This is for leaders to work on leadership and clarity. Where am I? Where I'm going? Vision. You can be an entrepreneur or an executive leader. It doesn't matter. This is to work on your leadership and clarity. What's your vision? How do you enlist people in your vision? That's the Leader Mind. Let me add the link here if you want to check it out. Oh, it's $333 per month, pounds plus VAT. The other 2 programs I wanted to share with you, it's one-to-one coaching with me or with someone from my team. There's the VIP day if you're in London or you're willing to travel to London. This is a new product. I'm so excited. The idea is to spend a day together, whether you have a big decision to make, when you want to work on your business vision or your personal vision, when you want to land a different job, or you want to build a strategy, overcome a challenge, or grasp an opportunity. There must be a specific, we do an hour call before to see what is the specific thing you want to work on. And then we spend the day together at the Shard. We start with 8:30 with a breakfast at the Shangri-La at the Shard. The Shard is the biggest, tallest building in London. It's amazing. We're really high. We see all the view. We start with the breakfast, and then we move to a meeting room at the Shard. Again, we feel we had all London. We work with our flip chart. We go for a walk by the Thames. We have lunch. We come back. It's a full day. We work together on your opportunity or challenge. So that's pretty exciting. That's part of the executive path, which is executive path is all the one-to-one coaching programs. If you're not in London and you want something similar to work intensive, there's the Leader Sprint. As part of the executive path, you'll find it in the same link. And this is 2 weeks. We meet 6 times in these 2 weeks, and there's chat in between to work intensely. It's a sprint, a 2-week sprint to work on a decision, on a transition, on a challenge or an opportunity, on a strategy, on a vision, whatever you want to work on these 2 weeks. We do it like a Leader Sprint. And of course, there are more one-to-one programs. You can just text us. So these were the programs I had to share today. I share something different every day. And thank you. I see people thanking me. Thank you so much. Thank you for showing up and investing the time to become a better leader for your team and learning all those tools. And I'm looking forward tomorrow to land this plane in the most incredible way. We're going to talk about inspiration. We're going to talk about planning. We're going to talk about action, because in the end of the day, it's all about the action. At the end of the day, something needs to get done. So thank you so much, and talk to you tomorrow. Bye.